The first warning in Lochdubh did not come as a scream, a broken window, or a mysterious stranger on the road. It came as a drip. A steady little drip from the village hall roof, landing in a red plastic bucket during rehearsal for the annual charity play. Around it stood half the village, pretending this was not embarrassing, while the other half prepared to hear about it before breakfast. Oliver Finch here, welcoming you back to Highland mystery. Tonight, Lochdubh is determined to prove it has culture. Painted scenery, borrowed costumes, a kettle working overtime, and an amateur dramatic society ready to suffer for art, as long as nobody from the next village laughs first. But pride is a dangerous thing in a leaky hall, and when everyone is busy putting on a show, Hamish Macbeth notices the one small detail that refuses to play its part. If you enjoy these Highland mysteries, do give the story a like and subscribe for more. Tonight's tale is called When the Curtain Wouldn't Rise. Chapter 1. The Leak in the Spotlight. The first bucket went under the skylight at 7 minutes past 6. The second followed at 10 past, placed beneath a brown stain in the ceiling that everyone had agreed not to notice until it began producing weather of its own. By 6:30, Lochdubh Village Hall had the look of a small indoor harbour. Buckets stood among the chairs. A basin sat beside the stage steps. A chipped enamel bowl had been put in the wings, where it collected rainwater with a steady plink that sounded, to the more theatrical members of the Amateur Dramatic Society, like tension. "Atmosphere," said Catriona MacLeod, clapping her hands once. "We shall call it atmosphere." No one answered. They were used to Catriona's habit of turning disaster into vocabulary. She stood in the middle of the hall in a long green cardigan and a scarf wound twice round her neck, though the heaters were on and making brave little clicking noises in the corners. Catriona had once directed a school production of Times, The Mikado Times, in 1978, and had lived on the moral authority of it ever since. Her hair was pinned up with pencils. There was a smudge of white paint on one cheek. She gave an impression of artistic endurance, like a woman who had suffered for culture and intended others to do the same. "Places, please," she called. "Places. We are not a rabble." "We're worse," muttered Ian Ross, who was dressed in a waistcoat 2 sizes too tight and carrying a fake pistol that had belonged to the Drama Society since before anyone could remember. "We're a rabble with costumes." That was not helpful, Ian. It was accurate. At the trestle table by the kitchen hatch, Mrs. Wellington was lining up mugs with the concentration of a general preparing artillery. The minister's wife had agreed to help with refreshments because, as she put it, charity should not be left entirely to people with theatrical opinions. Beside her, the Curry sisters, Nessie and Jessie, were slicing a fruit loaf into portions so thin they could have been used for legal evidence. "It'll be grand," said Nessie Curry, though she said it in a way that suggested it would not be grand. "Oh, grand," echoed Jessie, her eyes bright behind her spectacles. "If the roof does not come down—" Catriona turned. "The roof is not coming down." "No, no," said Nessie. "Never said it was," said Jessie. "You implied it with your eyebrows." The two sisters looked delighted. Their eyebrows had not had such attention in years. Hamish Macbeth came in through the side door just as a gust of rain followed him inside. He closed the door with his shoulder, shook water from his cap, and looked at the hall as a man might look at a sheep that had somehow got itself into a church. Behind him padded Lugs, wet, brown, broad, and unimpressed. The dog crossed the hall without waiting for permission, and climbed onto the front row, where he arranged himself across 3 chairs like a critic who had already decided the evening would be too long. "Hamish!" cried Catriona. "There you are!" "That's no usually a good beginning," said Hamish. He was tall and red-haired, with that loose, lazy-looking way of moving that caused strangers to mistake him for harmless. The villagers knew better. Hamish could look as if he were half asleep while noticing who had sugar in their tea, who avoided a name, and who had put a wet umbrella in the wrong stand. "We had a complaint about noise," he said mildly. "Noise?" Catriona looked wounded. "This is rehearsal." It was described as a woman shouting about emotional truth. That was rehearsal, and a man saying he'd rather drown himself in the loch than enter from stage left again. That was iron. "I stand by it," said Ian. Hamish removed his cap and looked up at the skylight. Another drop fell into the first bucket. Plink. I see the hall's improved, he said. It is perfectly serviceable, said Catriona. It's raining indoors. It is a historic building. History's usually drier. A few people laughed. Catriona did not. She pointed to a stack of folding chairs. If you have come to be useful, Hamish, you can carry those to the back. We need a proper aisle for Friday. I came as the police. And now you're community police. There was no escape from that. In Lochdubh, helpfulness had a way of being imposed on a man before he had time to look busy. Hamish carried chairs while the rehearsal gathered itself like a hen with too many chicks. The play was a sentimental comedy called Time's a Season for Mrs. Morag, written by Catriona's late cousin and rewritten, according to village rumour, by Catriona until the late cousin could no longer be blamed. It involved mistaken letters, a stern aunt, a visiting laird, 2 engagements, and a scene in which Ian Ross had to declare love while holding a tray of scones. I will not say the line, Ian announced. You will, said Catriona. No man can say, my heart rises like your soda bread, and keep his dignity. You have never been overburdened with dignity. Mrs. Wellington made a small, choking noise into the tea-urn. Hamish grinned and set down the chairs. He was about to retreat when something small and grey shot from under the stage. It was Sunsy, his wildcat, carrying in her mouth a torn gold tassel from some old curtain tie-back. She paused beneath the centre aisle, yellow eyes bright, as if daring anyone to object. Sunsy, said Hamish, leave that. Sunsy did not leave it. She took it under Luggs's chair and began worrying at it with savage concentration. That cat should not be in here, said Catriona. She's no much for amateur theatre, said Hamish. But she likes props. She likes destruction. Aye, but with standards. Catriona gave him the look she usually reserved for actors who said they had found their own interpretation of a line. Then she turned back to the stage. Right. We begin at Act 2. Places. Ian, you stand on the blue cross. Morag, you enter from the kitchen door. No, not the real kitchen door, the imaginary kitchen door. We have spoken about this. I'm not a mind reader, said Morag, a round woman with nervous hands and a talent for being in the wrong place. That is why we mark the floor. Catriona strode to the stage and crouched with a roll of silver gaffer tape. She tore off a strip with her teeth and fingers, leaving a ragged scalloped edge where the tape had stretched and snapped. Then she pressed it onto the worn floorboards in a bright little slash. Hamish noticed the edge because, a moment later, another strip caught on the sole of his boot. He lifted his foot and peeled it free. Careful, said Catriona. That marks Morag's faint. Does Morag know she's fainting? I do now, said Morag. Hamish held up the silver strip. Its torn edge was not straight. It had little half-moon bites along one side, as if the tape had been gnawed by a polite mouse. You need scissors, he said. Scissors go missing, said Catriona. Tape stays loyal. Aye? She smiled too brightly and took the strip from him. Tape fixes everything. There was a little silence after that. Not a dramatic one. Just the kind that happens when everyone in a room knows a statement is untrue but too convenient to challenge. From above the stage came a faint creak. Catriona looked up. So did Hamish. The lighting bar hung over the painted flats. Black lamps pointed down like sleepy birds. A rope disappeared into shadow near the side rigging. Nothing moved. Old building, said Catriona. Aye, said Hamish. Places? She said again, louder. We are wasting time. The rehearsal stumbled on. Outside, the wind came hard against the door, rattling it in its frame. Inside, the kettle boiled, the buckets filled, the actors forgot lines, and the village carried on pretending that the hall was fine because it had always been fine enough. Hamish watched Catriona mark another place with silver tape. Plink went the bucket. Plink, plink. And on the front row, Luggs gave a deep sigh, as if already weary of the performance. Chapter 2. A Man with Opinions Arrives. Miles Hargreaves arrived in Lochdubh wearing a scarf that seemed to have been chosen to insult the weather. It was long, black, and theatrical, and he arranged it round his neck as he stepped into the Red Lion as if he expected an audience to recognize the gesture. His coat was expensive in a discreet way. His boots were not made for mud, but had been forced to meet some on the short walk from his hired car, which appeared to have taken the experience personally. The pub went quiet, not silent. Lochdubh rarely gave outsiders the satisfaction of silence, but conversation lowered itself like a dog putting its head on its paws while keeping both eyes open. Mr. Hargreaves smiled. It was not an unkind smile exactly. It was worse. It was the smile of a man who had already arranged the room into categories. "Charming," he said. Nobody in the Red Lion knew whether he meant the pub, the village, or their collective lack of polish. Behind the bar, Jock Campbell said, "Pint? Dry white wine, if you have anything drinkable." Jock looked at the taps, then at the optics, then at the small shelf where 2 bottles of white wine had been kept since a wedding party in April. "We have white wine. Then I shall be brave." Hamish Macbeth, sitting near the fire with a bowl of stew, saw Jock's mouth tighten. The fire smoked a little when the wind turned, and the room smelled of wet wool, gravy, old beer, and peat. It was one of the few smells in the world that could make a man forgive November. Catriona MacLeod rose from a table near the window. "Mr. Hargreaves." "Miles, please," he said, taking her hand and looking around the pub as if he might be asked to review it later. "You must be Mrs. MacLeod." "Miss." "Of course." There was a brief pause in which Catriona decided not to be offended until she knew whether she needed him. Miles Hargreaves was the festival adjudicator for the district showcase. He had written theatre criticism for newspapers that people in Lochdubh did not read, appeared twice on Radio Scotland, and once used the phrase rural authenticity in a review of a school play, which had made him famous among amateur dramatic societies for exactly the wrong reasons. This year, the district showcase had promised a proper audience, a proper stage, and a cheque large enough to repair part of a roof if one was not too particular about which part. Lochdubh wanted it. Catriona wanted it. The hall committee wanted it so badly they spoke of it as if it had moral importance. Miles Hargreaves could recommend them, or he could laugh. That was the power he carried into the pub, and everyone felt it. He accepted his wine, inspected it, and drank. "Heroic," he said softly. Jock's face became very calm. Catriona gave a bright laugh. "We're so pleased you could come early and see the hall before Friday." "Yes," said Miles. "I always prefer to inspect local conditions. One learns so much before the curtain rises." "That sounds ominous," said Hamish. Miles turned. His eyes moved over Hamish's uniform and settled on his face. "And you are?" "Hamish Macbeth, village constable." How reassuring. "Does the theatre often require police supervision?" "Only when the acting gets violent." There was a snort from Ian Ross, who sat 2 tables away, pretending not to listen. He had changed out of his waistcoat, but still wore the offended expression of a man who had been asked to say a line about soda bread. Miles gave Hamish a longer look, deciding whether he was being mocked. "Amateur theatre," he said, "is a noble tradition when approached seriously." "Aye," said Hamish. "Like fishing, but it's still best no to fall in." Catriona moved quickly. "Mr. Hargreaves has very kindly agreed to look over our staging. Lighting, sightlines, general safety," said Miles. "These old halls can be death traps if people confuse enthusiasm with competence." The words settled badly. Mrs. Wellington, sitting with the Curry sisters and a pot of tea, stiffened. Mary Drummond, chair of the hall committee, smiled harder than anyone needed to smile. Mary was a compact woman in a navy skirt suit and a string of pearls she wore to events that required sincerity. Her public face was cheerful efficiency. She chaired meetings, organised raffles, remembered birthdays, and sent thank-you cards written in blue ink. She had the manner of a woman holding a tray that must not wobble. "Our hall has served Lochdubh for generations," she said. "I'm sure it has," said Miles. "That is often the problem." Before Mary could answer, The pub door opened again, and Detective Chief Inspector Blair came in, with rain on his shoulders and ill will in his eyes. Blair was a large, sweating man who made every room seem smaller. He had come north on some unrelated Strathbane business, and had discovered, with deep personal injury, that there was a charity performance in Lochdubh for which no one had thought to reserve him a seat. He saw Hamish, and brightened in the manner of a man finding something to kick. "Well, well, Macbeth. Heard you're treading the boards." A few heads turned. Hamish went on eating stew. "Only the floorboards, sir. They tell me you're in the play. Village Bobby in Tights, is it? It's a drawing-room comedy. Same thing to you, Highland types." The pub temperature changed. Lochdubh would insult Hamish freely because he belonged to them. Blair insulting him was different. That was like a stranger throwing stones at a dog sleeping by your own hearth. Hamish set down his spoon. "I'm helping with a reading because a man's ill," he said mildly. "It's no a police matter. Everything's a police matter when you make a fool of the uniform." The edge in Hamish's voice was very faint when he answered. "Then you'll have a full diary, sir." There was one sharp laugh from somewhere near the bar. It died quickly when Blair turned. Miles Hargreaves looked interested for the first time. "Ah," he said. "Local hierarchy. Always useful." Blair glared at him. "And who the hell are you?" "Miles Hargreaves. Theatre critic and festival adjudicator. Never heard of you. How mutual fame eludes us." Jock Campbell became suddenly busy polishing a glass that was already in danger of becoming transparent. Catriona guided Miles out before the evening, developed reviews of a less cultural kind. The rain had eased to a fine, wet mist by the time Hamish followed them to the hall. He told himself he was going because the noise complaint still needed smoothing. In truth, he wanted a look at Miles Hargreaves in the building. Some men carried trouble because they sought it. Others carried it because they noticed what people had spent years training themselves not to see. Miles, Hamish suspected, was both. The hall corridor smelled of damp coats, emulsion paint, and the ancient kettle that never truly cooled. Posters from past productions curled on the walls. The Lass of Lairg, A Murder at the Manse, 3 Weddings, and a Sheepdog. Someone had drawn spectacles on a faded photograph of a visiting counsellor. Miles examined everything. "Quaint," he said. Catriona's smile tightened. "It is a working village hall." "Yes, I can smell that." They entered the main room. The stage lights were on, throwing yellow pools across the boards. Silver tape marks shone like little fish scales on the floor. Above the stage, the old beam crossed the ceiling in shadow. Miles stopped. It was a small sound, but Catriona heard it. So did Myrie Drummond, who had just come in carrying a committee tote bag stuffed with papers, biscuit packets, and what looked like half the office supplies in Sutherland. "Something wrong?" asked Myrie. Miles did not look at her. He was looking up. "That beam is tired," Catriona answered too quickly. "It's been checked." "By whom?" "A man." "A qualified man?" "A man who knows beams." Hamish watched Myrie's fingers tighten on the handles of her tote. Miles walked to the stage steps and climbed up. He moved with the confidence of someone who had spent a life stepping into spaces and judging them. He looked at the lighting bar, the ropes, the flats, the patched curtain, and the upper platform half hidden in shadow. "I will want to see the rigging properly," he said. "Of course," said Catriona. "And the attic hatch." Myrie's smile flickered. "The hatch sticks. Then it should be unstuck." "It's nothing interesting up there," said Myrie lightly. "Dust and old Christmas decorations. Dust can be very informative." "From the floor," Hamish said. "Aye, especially if it's been disturbed." Miles looked down at him. "Quite." The two men's eyes met for a moment. Hamish saw sharpness there, and vanity, and something else. Not kindness, not exactly, but not stupidity either. Catriona clapped her hands. "Rehearsal, please. Mr. Hargreaves has had a long journey." "I have had worse," said Miles. "I once reviewed an outdoor Macbeth in Perthshire during a hailstorm." "That must have been difficult," said Mrs. Wellington. Mostly for Macbeth. Hamish glanced up at the beam again. There were old stains around it, old repairs, newer patches, paint where there should have been bare wood, silver tape around a cable that had no business being taped to anything bearing weight. Myrie noticed him looking. "Hamish," she said too brightly, "you'll stay for tea?" "No," said Hamish. "I've seen what happens when folks stay too long here. They get cast." The line got a laugh. Even Myrie laughed. But Miles Hargreaves did not. He was still looking at the ceiling. Chapter 3. Understudy. By 9 o'clock, the hall smelled of paint, wet wool, instant coffee, and fear. Fear, in amateur theatre, often had the same smell as instant coffee. The lead actor, a retired bank manager named Alastair Grant, had developed a temperature, a cough, and a sudden respect for his own mortality. His wife had telephoned Catriona to say he could not possibly rehearse. Catriona had taken the news as if Alasdair had chosen illness out of spite. "He is central to Act 2, she said. "He's central to his own flu," said Mrs. Wellington. "He has one big speech. He can cough it from home." Catriona ignored her. Her eyes moved across the hall and landed on Hamish. "No," said Hamish. "You haven't heard what I'm asking." I have. You have the height. I'm no acting. You only need to read. I read police notices. You have a pleasant voice. It's wanted by law. No theatre." The village watched with the happy cruelty reserved for seeing a man drawn into embarrassment. "I think Hamish would be splendid," said Jessie Curry. "Very natural," said Nessie. "Natural as a deer in a shop window," said Iron Ross. Hamish looked for escape. Luggs had abandoned him and was lying belly up in the front row, all four paws relaxed in moral betrayal. Sunsey had not been seen since stealing the tassel, and was probably under the stage chewing history. Miles Hargreaves sat in the back row with a notebook open on his knee. He had the attentive stillness of a man waiting for weakness to ripen. "All right," Hamish said at last. "I'll read it once. Wonderful." Catriona thrust a script into his hands. "You enter from the garden. Which is where?" "The left." "My left?" "The audience's left." "So my right?" "No. Your left when you are facing—" "Oh, just stand there on the silver mark." Hamish looked down. The silver gaffer tape shone under his boot. "Fine." The scene began badly and did not improve. Morag missed her cue because she was waiting for an imaginary clock to strike. Ian knocked over a chair and blamed the chair. Hamish delivered a speech about hidden affection with the same calm seriousness he might have used to report a stolen bicycle. The village loved every second of it. "More feeling," called Catriona. "I'm feeling a great deal," said Hamish. "Not humiliation. Tenderness. That'll take practice." Even Miles smiled then, but the smile was not entirely mocking. He wrote something down. The rehearsal went on until the rain strengthened and began lashing the windows. The buckets performed steadily. The kettle boiled again. Mrs. Wellington passed biscuits. Myrie moved in and out of the hall, checking lists, straightening chairs, touching the silver tape marks with the toe of her shoe whenever one began to lift. Hamish noticed that. Mary did not like things out of place. If a chair stood crooked, she moved it. If a mug had a chip, she turned the chip away. If someone mentioned the roof, she spoke of fundraising. Respectability, Hamish thought, was sometimes just panic with good handwriting. At 10:30, Catriona released them. "Better," she announced. No one looked convinced. "Much better," she insisted. "Friday will be perfectly fine." Outside, the wind struck the hall hard enough to make the stage flats tremble. From somewhere above came a soft, shifting sound. Not a crack, not a fall. A small, dull drag, like a sandbag moving against wood. Hamish looked up. Catriona looked up too. For a moment, her face changed. The stage lights caught the sharp liondeef worry around her mouth. Then she looked away. "Old buildings talk," she said. "Aye," said Hamish. "But they don't usually whisper." Miles Hargreaves closed his notebook. "Miss MacLeod," he said. A word. The others slowed at once. There is no village hearing sharper than the hearing of people pretending not to listen. Katrina stiffened. Of course. Hamish moved toward the door, but not quickly. Miles stepped closer to Catriona, lowering his voice just enough to make everyone want to hear it. That beam concerns me. It has concerned many people over the years, said Catriona. Mostly people who enjoy being concerned. I am serious. So am I. I cannot in good conscience recommend this hall for the showcase, unless certain things are reported. Myrie, who had been collecting mugs near the kitchen hatch, went very still. Reported, said Catriona, to the council, the festival committee, whoever holds responsibility. Myrie came forward. That would be premature. Miles turned to her. Would it? We are already arranging repairs. Are you? Yes. Proper repairs? Myrie's smile returned, but it looked painted on. Mr. Hargreaves, these things take time, money, forms. You know how village halls are. I know how people die in them when everyone says that. That silenced the room. It was an ugly sentence because it was possible. Catriona flushed. This is a charity performance. We are trying to do something good. Then do not do it under a dangerous beam. The hall is not dangerous, said Myrie. Miles looked at her for a long moment. Then you will have no objection to showing me the attic hatch. It sticks, she said again. Tomorrow, then. He tucked his notebook under his arm. I will come early. No one moved. Then Mrs. Wellington said briskly, Tea before you go, Mr. Hargreaves. No, thank you. He put on his scarf. It took longer than it should have. The villagers began to leave in twos and threes, muttering about weather, illness, and people from away who thought they knew everything because they had once been printed in a newspaper. Hamish remained behind to gather his cap and persuade Lugs to abandon the front row. The dog refused at first, making himself heavy in the boneless way of animals and small children. From the kitchen, he heard Myrie's voice. Catriona, this cannot get out. It won't. He likes power. He likes attention. If he writes one thing about negligence, they'll shut us down. There was a pause. Then Catriona said, more quietly, Perhaps they should. Hamish stopped with one hand on Lugs's collar. Myrie's answer was sharp. Do not say that. The kitchen door opened before Hamish could move. Myrie came out carrying her tote bag. Her eyes met his. Still here, Hamish? Trying to remove a critic from the front row, he said, nodding at Lugs. Myrie smiled. Perhaps he's waiting to see how it ends. Aye, said Hamish. That's the danger with critics. She went out into the rain. Hamish finally got Lugs moving. At the door, he turned back and looked once more at the stage. The silver marks glimmered under the lights. Above them, the beam was dark, patched, and silent. For the moment, Chapter 4. The thud behind the curtain. Morning came grey and mean, with rain blowing sideways across Lochdubh as if the sky had lost patience. Hamish was making tea in the police station when the telephone rang. He looked at it for a second, before answering. There are rings that sound ordinary, and rings that seem to bring a room's temperature down. This was the second kind. Police station. A breath. Then Catriona MacLeod's voice, stripped of all direction. Hamish, come to the hall. What's happened? Just come. He found her standing outside the village hall in her green cardigan, though the rain had soaked it dark at the shoulders. She held the keys in both hands. Her face had gone the colour of paper kept too long in a drawer. Behind her, Myrie Drummond sat on the low wall with Mrs. Wellington's coat around her shoulders. Jessie Curry was crying quietly. Nessie Curry was not crying at all, which somehow looked worse. The hall door stood open. Hamish went in alone. At first the building seemed as it always did after a long night. Stale, damp, faintly ridiculous. A bucket had overflowed near the skylight and spread water across the floor in a flat shine. A chair lay on its side. Someone had left a half-eaten biscuit on the tea table. The stage lights were off. Then Hamish saw the shape behind the curtain. Miles Hargreaves lay on the stage. Partly in the wings, the black scarf twisted near one shoulder. Above him One of the rigging weights had come down where it should not have come down. There was no need for drama. Death had a way of making drama look cheap. Hamish stood still. The hall was a place for pretend grief, pretend anger, pretend endings. This was not pretend. That was what made it obscene. He crossed carefully, noting where the floor was wet, where the tape marks were scuffed, where the rope trailed from above. He knelt, checked what did not need checking, and stood again. His eyes moved upward. The rope end had been brought down and fixed near the side brace. It was not tied. It was secured with silver gaffer tape. Hamish stared at it. Silver tape, wrapped in a hurry, torn edge, scalloped. He did not touch it. Outside, voices rose. A car door slammed. Blair had arrived. He came in with 2 uniformed officers, rain steaming off him, face already red with certainty. "Where is he?" Hamish stepped down from the stage. Behind the curtain, Blair pushed past him, looked, swore, and then looked upward. "Jesus! Health and safety nonsense. I told them these village places were death traps." "You told them that this morning, did you?" "Don't get smart. I'm asking when you formed the view." Blair ignored that. He took out a cigarette, put it in his mouth, and lit it beneath the no smoking sign by the kitchen door. "Accident," he said around the cigarette. "Shoddy maintenance. Rotten hall. Some fool tying up ropes with sticky tape." "Aye," said Hamish softly. "Some fool." Blair narrowed his eyes. "What's that meant to mean?" "It means the caretaker would know you silver tape on rope. And you know that because you're the world expert on village idiots." "I know Alec MacIver," Blair snorted. "Alec Spanner MacIver? Drunk half the time and angry the rest? He's fussy about knots. That'll look grand on a report. Not guilty, Your Honour, on account of being fussy." Hamish did not answer. He was looking at the floor. There was a smear near one of the silver marks. Not blood. Something pale, grey and sticky where tape had been pressed down and lifted. A little residue. A little shape. Nothing much. But crime, like village gossip, often began with nothing much. Catriona appeared in the doorway, shivering. Blair rounded on her. "You in charge of this circus?" She flinched. "I direct the society." "Then you can start explaining how a man comes to be flattened by your equipment. Mr. Hargreaves asked to come early, to look over the hall. Who let him in?" "I did," said Catriona, barely audible. "At 7:30. And then?" "He said he wanted to make notes alone. I went to fetch Mary. When we came back," her mouth closed. Mary appeared behind her, clutching Mrs. Wellington's coat. "I found him," said Mary. "We both did." Blair blew smoke toward the ceiling. "Convenient." Hamish's voice sharpened. "Put that cigarette out, sir." Blair turned slowly. "What?" "It's a crime scene. And a hall full of old paint, old curtains, and paraffin heaters. Put it out." For a moment, Blair looked as if he might explode. Then one of the uniformed officers glanced at the no-smoking sign, and Blair crushed the cigarette under his shoe with unnecessary violence. "Happy?" "No," said Hamish. The word was quiet enough to be missed by everyone except Blair, who heard it and disliked it. By mid-morning, Lochdubh knew that Miles Hargreaves was dead. By 11, half the village knew he had been killed by the lighting rig. By noon, those who had not seen the hall in years were certain they had always warned about that beam. At the Red Lion, people spoke in lowered voices and looked toward Alec MacIver whenever he entered. He was a narrow, grey-haired man, with hands like old tools and a face made suspicious by years of being blamed for things he had only been asked to patch. He came to the police station just after lunch, cap in hand and anger in his shoulders. "I didn't touch that rope." Hamish looked up from his notes. "I never said you did, but they are saying it." "Aye." Alec's jaw worked. "I told them. I told the committee, you can patch a roof, you can patch a window, you do not patch weight-bearing things and call it thrift." "Who told you to patch them?" Alec looked away. "Folk." "What folk?" "Committee folk. Hall folk. Folk with forms." "Mary?" He said nothing. Hamish waited. Outside, rain tapped the window. At last Alec said, "She wanted the hall open. And you?" "I wanted paid." There was no self-pity in it. Only shame. Hamish nodded. "That's often how bad things get done." Alec looked at him. "I never killed that man." "No," said Hamish. "I don't think you did." But when Alec left, Hamish watched him go with a troubled face. Not because he thought Alec guilty, because the village wanted him to be, and that was sometimes more dangerous. Chapter 5. Canteen gravy, kitchen soup. Blair believed in food as punishment. At least, that was the only explanation Hamish could find for being dragged to the Inverness canteen and placed before a plate of something described as steak pie. The pastry sagged in defeat. The gravy had the shine of industrial varnish. A lonely carrot floated near the edge, like a survivor waving for help. Blair ate with appetite. "There's nothing mysterious here," he said. "Old hall, bad maintenance, critic poking his nose in. Something gives way. End of." "A man is dead," said Hamish. "Aye, and unless you want Strathbane crawling with inspectors for a month, you'll not turn it into one of your romantic wee puzzles." Hamish pushed at the pastry. It was not an accident. Blair snorted. "Because?" "Because the rope was fixed with silver tape." "That's your evidence? Tape?" "Alec McIver does not use tape for rigging." "Maybe Alec McIver uses whatever is to hand when he's drunk or lazy." "He's neither." "Everyone's something, Macbeth. You just like pretending peasants are poets." Hamish's eyes lifted. "They are people, sir. It saves time if you remember that." Blair's face darkened. "Watch yourself." Hamish did. He watched Blair mop gravy with bread, watched Kieran Ward pretend not to listen from the next table, and watched the case become smaller in official hands, because small cases were easier to close. By late afternoon he was back in Lochdubh, where the Italian place near the harbour served him soup that tasted of tomatoes, garlic, and human kindness. The owner put bread beside it without asking. "You are too thin," she said. "I have hidden reserves." "Not after police canteen." This was true. Hamish ate slowly. Then began his interviews. Catriona MacLeod received him in the hall corridor, refusing to sit because sitting would look like collapse. Her hair was pinned too tightly, and her lipstick had been applied with the determination of a woman holding herself together by edges. "Miles was cruel," she said. "But he knew theatre. You wanted his approval. I wanted Lochdubh not to be laughed at. There are worse things. Easy to say when you're not the one standing on a stage." Hamish thought of the previous night and conceded the point silently. Alec McIver was in his shed behind the hall, surrounded by tins of screws, old hinges, sandpaper, and tools arranged with fussy order. He spoke in short, defensive bursts. "I reported the beam." "To whom?" "Myery. Committee. Years ago, then again last winter." "What did they say?" "That money was tight. That grants took time. That I was not to frighten people." "Did Miles ask about the attic hatch?" Alec's jaw tightened. "He did. Said he wanted to inspect above the stage." "I said he'd need permission." "From Myery?" "Aye. Chair of everything, queen of forms." Myery Drummond met Hamish in the hall kitchen, which smelled of old tea and lemon cleaner. She had already washed mugs that did not need washing. "Miles was making a fuss," she said. "He enjoyed making fusses." "Some people do." "Did he ask to see the attic hatch?" "He mentioned it." "And you said it was stuck?" "It is awkward." "That was not the question." Myery's smile wavered. "It sticks in wet weather." "Did Alec know that?" "Alec knows everything that's wrong with the hall. It's his hobby." The joke did not quite land. Ian Ross came last, in the Red Lion, where he sat with a whisky he had not drunk. Without his stage confidence, he seemed smaller and less handsome, his vanity like a hat set at the wrong angle. "Miles insulted me," he said. "You are not the only one," he said. "I overplayed emotional collapse. I've known emotional collapse. I had a kitchen extension fall through in March. That will mark a man." Iron looked suspiciously at Hamish, then decided agreement was safer. I did not kill him. I have not said you did. No, but Blair will. He's always liked a local fool. Hamish heard something true in that. Kieran Ward, the trainee constable, followed Hamish through half these conversations, writing too loudly, asking questions that sounded like accusations, because he had not yet learned that silence makes people nervous enough to help. So when exactly did you last see the deceased? He asked Myrie. Myrie blinked. The deceased? Miles, said Hamish gently. Oh, last night. After rehearsal. Where? In the corridor. He was asking about the attic hatch. And? I told him it was stuck. Hamish looked toward the ceiling. It was not stuck this morning. Myrie's hands stilled around the mug she was drying. Alec must have opened it. Alec, when asked, said he had not. The attic hatch sat above a narrow back passage near the stage. Hamish stood beneath it, looking up at the square outline in the ceiling, the faint scrape marks near the catch, and one small smear of silver residue on the frame. Tape again! Not much. Just enough. Outside the kitchen window, rain ran down the glass in wavering lines. Inside, the kettle clicked off, though Hamish had not heard anyone switch it on. Chapter 6. The Tape That Shouldn't Be There. The next day, the village hall had the atmosphere of a sick room. People came and went softly, though most had no reason to be there. They brought keys, receipts, half-remembered complaints, and opinions dressed as concern. Mrs. Wellington brought a fruit loaf. The Curry sisters brought nothing except themselves, which in Lochdubh was considered contribution enough. Of course, said Jessie Curry. I never trusted that attic. You never went up there, said Nessie. That is one reason I never trusted it. Hamish let them talk. The sisters were not merely gossip. They were weather vanes. If a rumour had wind behind it, they turned first. What are folks saying? He asked. That Alec should have fixed the rope, said Jessie. That Mary should have raised the money, said Nessie. That Catriona drove everyone too hard. That Ian Ross looked handsome in grief. Nessie turned to her sister. No one said that. You said it. I said he arranged himself in grief. There's a difference? There is to a woman. Hamish smiled faintly. In the prop cupboard, the smell of dust, old cloth, and damp cardboard was strong enough to feel. Costume hats sat in boxes. A fake sword leaned against a vacuum cleaner. A cracked mirror reflected Hamish in pieces. Luggs wedged himself in the doorway and refused to move. That dog, said Catriona from behind him, has chosen the worst possible place. He has a gift for it. Catriona tried to step around Luggs, failed, and was forced to stand close beside Alec, who had arrived to fetch a toolbox. The two avoided looking at each other with such effort that it became impossible not to notice. You and Alec are not friendly, said Hamish. Catriona stiffened. I respect his work. Aye, that is what folks say when they do not enjoy a person. Alec gave a dry bark of laughter. Catriona coloured. He is always negative. I am always wet, said Alec. Because the roof leaks. You make it sound as if we do nothing. You mostly discuss doing something. Luggs thumped his tail once, as if approving the exchange. On a shelf near the back, Hamish found the silver gaffer tape. The roll was dented along one edge, so that any strip torn from it came away with a distinctive scalloped pattern. A length was missing, but there was no telling when it had gone. Everyone uses that, said Catriona. I don't, said Alec. Yes, Alec, we know. Tape is moral failure. It is when used on rigging. Hamish examined the roll, then the floor, then a pile of scripts stacked beside a paint tin. Miles Hargreaves's notebook had been returned from the initial evidence bag for closer cataloguing. Hamish opened it carefully with gloves. The notebook was full of sharp little observations. Local enthusiasm not matched by discipline. Director brittle but intelligent. Police constable surprisingly unembarrassed by embarrassment. Hamish paused. Near the inside back cover, stuck to the leather, was a tiny strip of silver tape. It had not been placed there deliberately. It had adhered to the notebook, perhaps when Miles held it under his arm. perhaps when he set it down near the stage. Its torn edge showed the same scalloped bite. Catriona stared. That could have come from anywhere. Aye, said Hamish. That is the trouble with things that come from anywhere. They often don't. He placed the notebook aside. Mary Drummond entered then, carrying her committee tote bag. It was a large canvas thing printed with Lochdubh Hall Restoration Fund, though the fund had been restoring very little for years. From it protruded envelopes, forms, a packet of sugar cubes, 2 pens, and the corner of a tape measure. "Hamish," she said brightly. "Still at it?" "Murder is stubborn." She blinked. I thought, well, we don't know that word applies. It applies to a man killed by arrangement. A silence followed. Myrie set the tote on a chair. "Can I help?" Hamish looked at the bag. He looked at her hands. There was a faint grey shine on one finger, as if adhesive had recently collected dust. "Do you use the silver tape much?" he asked. She laughed. "In this hall?" "Constantly." "I fix what I can." "We all do," Alec muttered. "That's the problem." Myrie's smile sharpened. "Some of us try to keep places alive, Alec. Some of us only enjoy saying they're dying." For a moment, the room lost all its cosy clutter and became a place where old grievances stood upright. Hamish let the silence stretch. Then Luggs, tired of blocking the doorway, stood, turned, and knocked over a box of feathered hats. Sunsy flashed from behind the vacuum cleaner, seized one feather in his teeth, and vanished. Mrs. Wellington, passing outside, looked in. "I always said that Cat had theatrical leanings." The absurdity loosened the room, but not enough. Hamish bagged the small strip from Miles's notebook. Silver tape, scalloped edge. A harmless thing, if all it did was mark where an actor stood. A dangerous thing, if someone believed temporary fixes could bear the weight of truth. Chapter 7. Hamish's big mistake. The Red Lion at lunchtime had decided on Alec McIver. No vote had been taken. Lochdubh rarely required formalities when condemning one of its own. The conclusion moved from table to table with the soup, becoming firmer each time it passed a mouth. He had the keys. He was always complaining about the hall. He knew the ropes. He found the body, didn't he? By the time Hamish entered, Alec had become not merely a suspect, but a convenience. He sat alone near the back, shoulders hunched, his cap on the table before him. No one had told him to sit apart. They had simply made absence around him. Hamish felt a small, cold anger settle inside him. He went to the bar, ordered tea, and took the cup to Alec's table. "You'll be eating?" he asked. "No, you should. Folk are looking. They do that when they have eyes and no courage." Alec gave him a sideways glance. "Careful. That sounded like kindness. Must be the damp affecting me." Alec almost smiled. Hamish leaned closer. "The attic key. Keep it on you." Alec's face hardened. "I've given police everything." "I know. I'm telling you to keep that one safe until I ask for it. Things vanish. In panic." "In panic?" "In guilt, too. But panic is more common." Alec put his hand into his jacket and touched the keyring there. Across the room, Kieran Ward watched. Kieran was young enough to believe that good police work looked like catching other policemen doing bad police work. He had been embarrassed by Blair twice that morning and was eager to repair himself with authority. He saw Hamish speaking low to Alec. He saw Alec touch the key. He saw secrecy where Hamish had meant protection. 10 minutes later, Blair came in like a door being kicked open. "What's this I hear?" he roared. "About Macbeth telling a suspect to hide evidence." The pub froze. Hamish closed his eyes briefly. "Kieran," he said without turning, "one day you will learn that a thing half heard is not improved by shouting it." Kieran flushed scarlet near the bar. Blair advanced on Alec. "Hand over the key." Alec stood. "I was told." "Oh, were you now? Told by village Sherlock here? Very cosy. Very Highland. All of you covering each other until a man's skull is cracked by your rotten hall." Alec went white. "He was alive when I left." "When did you leave? Who saw you? What else have you fixed with string and lies?" "That's enough," said Hamish. Blair swung toward him. No, Macbeth. Enough is when I say enough. Hamish's voice stayed low, but the edge came into it, soft and sibilant as wind through a crack. You're frightening a witness in a public room because it makes you feel taller. The whole pub heard it. Blair's cheeks darkened. For a moment, Hamish thought he would explode. Instead, he jabbed a finger toward Alec. Station. Now. The damage was done. By evening, Alec was treated like filth on a clean carpet. People who had asked him for favours for 20 years now avoided his eye. The hall committee, terrified of being blamed, quietly placed distance between themselves and the man who had changed their light bulbs, mended their chairs, and opened the hall for every funeral tea and children's party since before half of them were married. Catriona cancelled rehearsal. Myrie announced that the charity show might be postponed out of respect. Though everyone heard the fear beneath, the village began to bleed pride. Hamish walked down by the harbour after dark with lugs beside him and Sunsey gliding somewhere in the black spaces between walls. The rain had eased to drizzle. Light from cottage windows trembled on the wet road. He had tried to protect the hall from Blair's bulldozing. Instead, he had handed Blair a man. That was the trouble with compassion, Hamish thought. It could be clumsy when it met machinery. Near Patel's shop, he saw Elspeth from the school office, standing beneath the awning, pretending to look for something in her handbag. She had been in the play. She had seen more than she was saying. Elspeth, he called gently. She stiffened. I don't want to be involved. You are involved. No. I don't want Blair involved with me. Or the village. They'll say things. What things? She looked toward the Red Lion. That I was there too late. That I wanted attention. That I'm making myself important. You know how folk are. I do. She swallowed. I saw someone at the hall, after everyone said it was empty. Who? Her mouth trembled around the answer. Then the door of the Red Lion opened, and voices spilled out, loud with drink and judgment. Elspeth stepped back. I can't. She hurried away into the rain. Hamish did not follow. Some witnesses needed chasing. Others needed shame to loosen its fingers first. Chapter 8. The Easy Villain. Alec McIvor's shed stood behind the village hall like a confession no one wanted to read. It contained everything a tidy accusation required. Tools, ropes, spare brackets, tins of paint, a workbench scarred by years of practical repairs. There were old pulleys in a box and lengths of cord hanging from nails. There was a ledger in which Alec recorded jobs done, jobs requested, and jobs ignored by committee decision. Blair loved the shed at once. Look at this, he said. A murderer's workshop. It is a caretaker's shed, said Hamish. With rope. Most sheds have rope. With tools. An unusual feature in a shed. Blair ignored him and began pulling things from shelves until Alec, standing outside under the thin rain, made a small wounded sound. Careful with that. Blair turned. What? Afraid we'll find something? It's a plane. My father's. For 1 second, Blair looked almost embarrassed. Then he covered it with anger. Sentiment now, is it? Hamish stepped between them. Go outside, Alec. I've done nothing. I know. Go outside before you say something that helps him. Alec went. Kieran Ward stood nearby, notebook in hand and misery on his face. He had begun to understand what his loose tongue had caused. Understanding did not yet make him useful, but it made him quieter, which was a start. Blair found a coil of rope. Same kint. No, said Hamish. No. No. That's newer. Different fibre. The rigging rope was older and treated. Blair threw it down. You always do this. Always making mist where there's a road. Sometimes the road ends in a bog. Hamish examined the shed carefully. Alec's repairs were everywhere, and every one of them bore a small signature. Red tape. Red tape around a cracked handle. Red tape marking a box of faulty plugs. Red tape tied to a chair awaiting repair. It was fussy. almost comic, but consistent. "Why red?" Hamish asked Alec outside. "So I know what's mine. And so daft folk don't use things not checked." "Do you ever use silver?" "No, never." Alec looked offended. "Silver is for stages and fools." That was one fact. The second came from the Italian place, where Hamish asked about the previous night. The owner remembered Alec because he had arrived just before closing, wet and bad-tempered, to pick up soup for his mother. "He said she would not eat the tinned kind," she said. "I told him good. A woman should have standards." "What time?" 11:15. Maybe 10 to. He waited because I packed bread." "Was he alone?" "He was with his face," which was enough company. 2 other people confirmed seeing Alec on the road with the soup container during the crucial window when the fatal setup must have been completed. Neither particularly liked him. That made the alibi stronger. The third fact was above the stage. Hamish climbed to the rigging platform with care. The space smelled of dust, damp, and old rope. From there, one could see the stage below the silver marks, the painted parlour, the spot where Miles would have stood if examining the beam or looking upward. The failed rope had not merely slipped. It had been arranged to appear temporarily secured, to hold just long enough, then give under load. It was too theatrical, too pointed. Alec would have tied it properly or refused to tie it at all. This had been done by someone who understood timing, marks, attention, and the useful blindness of an audience watching a rehearsal. Hamish stood in the shadows above the stage and remembered the sound from Chapter 3's rehearsal, a weight shifting while all eyes were on him making a fool of Lord Edwin. He remembered Catriona looking up. He remembered Mary in the side corridor. He remembered Miles saying he would inspect properly in the morning. Back below, Blair had found Alec's ledger. "Here. Complaints about the roof. Complaints about beams. Complaints ignored. Motive for rage. Motive for being right," said Hamish. Blair's eyes narrowed. "You're protecting him because he's local. I'm protecting the case because it's true." Outside, Alec stood alone in the rain, his shoulders bent beneath more than weather. For a moment, Hamish almost wanted Blair's answer to be right. It would be easier. The village could pour its fear into one difficult man and move on. The hall could mourn, repair a little, and pretend the rot had been personal rather than shared. But easy villains are often built from everyone else's comfort. Hamish looked at the strip of red tape fluttering from a broken chair. Then he looked at the silver marks on the stage. "No," he said softly. The hall had not been betrayed by the man who complained of its wounds. It had been betrayed by someone who needed those wounds hidden. Chapter 9. A social night without applause. The emergency hall committee meeting was announced for 7 and began, in the Lochdubh fashion, at 6:30. People arrived early to prove they were not afraid, then stood in damp coats pretending not to wonder who else might be. The hall heaters clicked and sighed. The kitchen smelled of tea, biscuits, wet wool, and lemon cleaner. Outside, the wind worried at the door like someone late and unwelcome. Hamish had asked that everyone connected to the final rehearsal attend. Catriona came with no clipboard, which made her look oddly unarmed. Ian Ross came in a dark jacket and arranged his grief less successfully than he hoped. Alec sat near the wall, stiff-backed, his cap in his hands. 2 villagers who had avoided him the day before now nodded at him too warmly, which was worse. Mary Drummond moved among them with a tray. "Tea? Biscuit? We're all shaken, but we must be civil." Her floral scarf was bright. Her smile was steady. Her tote bag hung from one shoulder. Lugs settled near the radiator in a patch of warmth. Sunsy sat on the stage edge, tail wrapped around her paws, watching the human committee with ancient disappointment. Blair arrived late enough to be noticed and early enough to claim control. He smelled of cigarette smoke and wet coat. "What's this performance, Macbeth?" "A timeline, sir." "Oh, for God's sake. A simple one." "Nothing is simple when you get your Highland poetry into it." Hamish did not answer. He stood at the front of the hall, not on the stage. That mattered. He did not want theatre. He wanted the room to see itself. Miles Hargreaves died because someone arranged the rigging to fail and look like an accident. That person knew the hall, knew the stage, and knew when attention would be elsewhere. A murmur ran through the room. Blair barked. "You'll not make accusations without evidence." "No," said Hamish. "I won't." He looked first at Alec. Alec was blamed because blame likes a plain coat. He had keys, tools, and a bad temper. But his repairs are marked with red tape. Always. Fussy habit. Alec looked down. He was also at the Italian place during the time the fatal arrangement was made, picking up soup for his mother, seen by 3 people, 2 of whom would rather compliment midges than Alec. A small, uneasy laugh moved through the hall. Alec's mouth twitched, then tightened. Hamish turned to the room. The silver tape used on the rigging came from the damaged roll used around this stage. The same scalloped edge. He lifted the evidence bag containing the small strip from Miles's notebook. This was stuck inside Miles Hargreaves's notebook. It came from contact with whoever had handled that tape near the stage or rigging during the argument and setup. Catriona whispered, "Everyone used that tape." "Aye. That was the idea. It was public enough to hide in." Myrie stood very still beside the tea table. Hamish looked at her tote bag. "Myrie, would you open your bag?" Her smile returned, offended and brave. "Really, Hamish? Please." Blair stepped forward. "I'll do it." "No," said Hamish, and the sibilant edge slipped into his voice. "You've done enough pawing through other people's dignity for 1 week." The room went still. Blair's face darkened. But something in Hamish's tone held him back. Myrie laughed softly. "This is absurd." She opened the tote herself. Inside were forms, envelopes, 2 pens, a packet of sugar cubes, a folded grant application, and a roll of silver gaffer tape. Its edge was damaged in the same scalloped pattern. "That proves nothing," she said. "No. Alone, it proves habit." Her eyes flickered. Hamish continued. Miles saw the cracked beam. "He asked for reports. He wanted to inspect the attic hatch. You told him it was stuck, but it wasn't. He threatened to report the hall unsafe, not because he hated Lochdubh, because he was right." Myrie's face hardened. "He enjoyed humiliating people." "He did. But a cruel man can still see a dangerous beam." Catriona sat down suddenly. Hamish's voice stayed quiet. "The hall's temporary fixes were not Alec's," he objected to them. "The decisions came from the committee. From you, Myrie. You kept patching because proper repair meant money, inspections, closure, embarrassment. The hall is where you matter, where people need you, where your smile becomes authority." Myrie's mouth opened, then closed. "I kept it alive." "You kept it appearing alive." A sound came from the back of the room. Elspeth stood there, pale but upright. "I saw Mrs. Drummond," she said. Every head turned. Myrie whispered, "Elspeth." "You came back after rehearsal. I was across the road. I'd forgotten my cardigan and didn't want to go in because I heard someone moving above the stage." "Why didn't you say?" Blair demanded. Elspeth flinched. Hamish turned on him. "Because you make truth feel like a punishment." Blair shut his mouth. Elspeth continued. "I saw the kitchen light. Then Mrs. Drummond came out with her bag." Myrie shook her head. "I went back for papers." "At midnight?" said Hamish. "I don't know the time. The kettle had been boiled near midnight. Still warm when the body was found early, and the plug timer in the kitchen had tripped at 12:15. Only one person here makes tea with 2 sugar cubes and leaves the wrappers twisted into wee knots." He looked toward the bin beside the kitchen door. "I notice them often enough. You do it at every meeting." Myrie's hand went to the packet of sugar cubes in her tote. "Small habits are loyal witnesses." Hamish went on, gently now. "You went up to the rigging platform while everyone watched me make a fool of myself on stage. You arranged the weight and the rope with a temporary silver tape fix that would fail later." Miles returned, or was asked to stand beneath the rigging to inspect what he had threatened to report. Then the hall did what everyone was meant to believe it had always been ready to do. "No," Myrie said, but the word had no strength. You meant to blame the hall, said Hamish. Then Alec. Then bad luck. Anything but the decision to hide danger. Myrie's cheerful mask cracked not dramatically, but as old plaster cracks one line first, then many. You don't understand, she whispered. They would have closed it. Yeah. The play, the children's parties, the dances, funeral teas, everything. People would have said I let it fail. So you let a man die instead. Her eyes filled with tears. He was going to sneer. In that paper. In front of Strathbane. In front of everyone. He would have made us a joke. No one spoke. The hall seemed to listen. Myrie looked around at the faces she had fed with tea, organised into rotas, soothed through quarrels, chased for raffle money, and quietly needed. I kept this place together, she said. Alec's voice came from the wall. No, Myrie. You taped it. That was what broke her. She sank into the chair behind her, one hand still clutching the sugar cubes, as if sweetness could steady what truth had undone. Outside, the wind struck the door once and moved on. There was no applause. Chapter 10. The hall, humbled. The next morning was clear and cold. After so much rain, the village looked surprised by sunlight. Water shone in the road, on stone walls, along the harbour ropes. The hills beyond Lochdubh stood dark and clean-edged beneath a pale sky. The hall doors were opened at 9. Not for rehearsal, not for performance, for inspection. This time, proper people came with ladders, lamps, clipboards, and no patience for village optimism. They examined the roof beam, the rigging platform, the damp plaster, the old wiring, and the history of small repairs that had pretended to be maintenance. The hall, like many proud things, looked worse when seen clearly. Blair claimed credit by 10:30. I had my eye on the committee chair from the start, he announced outside the hall, where 2 reporters and the Curry sisters stood ready to receive whatever version of events was loudest. Jessie Curry turned to Nessie. Did he? No. Perhaps it was his other eye. Hamish, standing near the steps with lugs, heard and looked away to hide a smile. Blair saw him, and Macbeth assisted. How generous, said Hamish. Don't get smart. I wouldn't dream of rising above my station, sir. Blair frowned, uncertain whether he had been insulted. Since uncertainty displeased him, he lit a cigarette near the no smoking sign that had been moved outside with the debris. Inside, Alec McIver stood beneath the damaged beam, while one inspector explained what should have been done years ago. Alec listened without triumph. There are few pleasures in being proved right after someone has died. Catriona MacLeod approached him near the stage. I should have listened. Aye. I mean, properly. Aye. She waited. Alec Seahill. I'll help with the repair list. Her eyes filled, though she blinked the tears back briskly. You are very annoying. I've been called worse this week. That too. It was not forgiveness, exactly. But in Lochdubh, many repairs began with irritation and a shared job. By noon, the hall committee had admitted awkwardly, incompletely, but aloud, that appearance had been chosen over safety. There would be proper oversight. There would be grant applications not hidden in tote bags. There would be fundraising without pretending the roof merely had character. Mrs. Wellington organised tea because moral collapse did not excuse dehydration. Patel arrived with biscuits and a box for donations. The Italian place sent soup in large containers. Ian Ross volunteered to sand the stage edge, and then spent 20 minutes explaining the correct way to sand it until Mrs. Wellington took the paper from his hand and told him to carry chairs. Elspeth brought her forgotten cardigan and stayed. Kieran Ward found Hamish outside near the back steps. I made a mess of it, he said. Aye, I thought I was doing proper police work. Proper police work does less shouting in its own head. Kieran nodded miserably. Can I fix it? Start by apologising to Alec. Then listen twice as much as you write. The young man went inside. Hamish watched him go. There was hope for anyone embarrassed by his own certainty. The charity show did not happen as planned. It became something simpler 2 weeks later, staged at the school with fewer lights, fewer ambitions, and more honesty than anyone had intended. They raised less money, but more trust. Catriona gave a short speech that lasted longer than promised, and did not once say professional standards. The district showcase passed them by that year. No one died of it. In time, the hall roof was repaired. The rigging was replaced. The attic hatch was fitted with a lock whose key was not hidden behind a loose brick. A small plaque went up near the kitchen, not naming Miles Hargreaves grandly, but acknowledging that safety was a duty owed to the living and the dead. Alec pretended not to care, and polished the plaque when no one was looking. On the first cold morning after the heaters were fixed, lugs sprawled in the sun patch by the radiator, like an old hearthrug restored to its rightful estate. Sunsy prowled along the stage edge, as if taking ownership of the improved premises. Hamish stood in the doorway, hands in pockets, watching villagers move around the humbled hall. They were quieter with it now, less boastful, more careful. A beloved place had survived, but not because the village lied harder. It survived because, at last, it told the truth and asked for help. Outside, wind moved down from the hills, sharp and clean. Inside, the kettle boiled. And this time, nobody called it a temporary fix. The village hall stayed standing. But it didn't feel quite the same for a while, like a room after an argument, when the chairs haven't been put back. Lochdubh learned that a community can harm itself without meaning to, simply by needing a villain too quickly. That strip of silver gaffer tape was meant to be harmless, quick, tidy, temporary. But the scalloped edge became the truth marker, because small shortcuts leave signatures, and signatures do not care how well you smile. Respectability is a hungry thing. It will eat safety if you let it, and it will happily feed on the quiet person in the corner. Community spirit is real, but it turns sharp when it protects pride instead of people. Still, kettles boil, soup gets shared, and neighbours turn up with ladders and no speeches. In the Highlands, repair is often the truest kindness done quietly, so nobody has to fight their pride to accept it. So let me ask you this. When something goes wrong in a close-knit place, do people reach for blame because they're cruel or because they're frightened? And that brings us to the end of tonight's Highland mystery. When everyone called it an accident, Hamish listened for the one small detail that didn't sound right, and, as so often in Lochdubh, the smallest thing in the room turned out to be the thing holding the truth. Thank you for spending this time with Highland Mystery. Until next time, keep the kettle warm, listen carefully to what people do not say, and remember, in a village, every silence has neighbours. Good night.